She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw anything. She didn't make a scene the way Hollywood loves to pretend she did. When Marilyn walked off that set, she did it quietly, so quietly, in fact, that most people didn't realize she was gone until the cameras stopped rolling and the director shouted her name into a room that no longer held her. It happened on a warm afternoon in 1961, during the production of one of her most troubled films. The crew was tense, the schedule behind, the studio executives restless. Everyone felt the pressure, but Marilyn carried it differently. She carried it in the tightening of her shoulders, in the tremor behind her smile, in the way her eyes seemed to drift toward the exit every few minutes, as if mapping out the distance between escape and collapse. To the outside world, she looked radiant. She always did. The lights loved her. She made the cameras bloom. But the truth lived beneath the glow. Exhaustion, fear, a growing sense that the world she helped build no longer had room for the woman she truly was. That afternoon, the director insisted on reshooting a scene she had already done 10 times. The same blocking, the same lines, the same expression he claimed wasn't authentic enough. He wanted more vulnerability, more fragility, more of that magic she could summon on command. What he didn't see, what no one cared to see, was that she wasn't acting anymore. She was breaking, slowly. When she tried to speak up, her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I need a minute," she said. But nobody listened. The assistant director barked orders. The lighting crew made adjustments. The makeup artist dabbed under her eyes, ignoring the way Marilyn flinched at every touch. She stood still, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. Then came the moment that changed everything. A producer stepped onto the set holding a revised script. He had been arguing with the studio for days, and Marilyn was caught in the middle of decisions made far above her head. He didn't look at her with empathy or respect. He looked at her the way businessmen look at assets whose value fluctuates too often. "We need you to redo the entire sequence," he told her bluntly. "The studio wants it. And try not to be late tomorrow. We can't keep covering for you." Something inside her cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a thin piece of glass under pressure. She blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. She tried to steady her breathing. She tried to tell herself it was just another bad day in a long line of bad days. But then he added, almost casually, "You know how much money you cost us when you disappear." Disappear. The word hit her like a slap. Because disappearing was exactly what she feared becoming. Forgettable, unseen, fading behind the myth the world loved more than the woman. She swallowed, looked around the room, saw faces that pretended not to stare, saw impatience, annoyance, boredom. Not one person asked if she was all right. Not one. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred. She felt that familiar rush of heat behind her eyes, the warning she dreaded more than anything. She didn't want to cry. Not there, not in front of them, not in a place where her tears would be treated as another inconvenience. She turned away, trying to hide the emotion climbing up her throat. A makeup artist reached for her, thinking she was just adjusting her costume, but the gentle brush against her arm made her freeze. That was it. She stepped back. Just one step. Then another. She didn't say a word. Not, "I quit." Not, "I'm done." Not even "excuse me." She simply walked. Slow at first, almost uncertain. Then faster, as if she feared the walls might close in before she reached the door. People called her name. A few shouted for her to come back. One of the producers muttered something about unprofessional behavior. But she didn't stop. She didn't turn. Outside the stage, the sunlight hit her face, and the tears she'd been holding finally spilled over. Not loud sobs, just quiet, shaking breaths as she pressed her back against the wall and covered her mouth with trembling hands. No one from the set followed her. No one asked if she was okay. For 40 years, the official story remained the same. Marilyn had a bad day. Marilyn was being difficult. Marilyn was emotionally unstable. But the real reason she walked off that set was something no one knew. Something hidden in the shadows of that production, buried under studio politics and personal betrayals. Something that had been waiting, unchallenged, unspoken, for 4 decades. And it started with a conversation that happened hours earlier. A conversation that, according to the one person who witnessed it, changed the course of her entire day. It began quietly, with a knock on her dressing room door. The knock was soft, hesitant, almost polite. Marilyn looked up from the vanity mirror, where she had been studying her own reflection as if trying to understand the person staring back at her. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders heavy. But when the knock came again, she straightened slightly, wiped beneath her lashes, and forced her voice to sound composed. "Come in." The door opened just enough for a man to step inside. A familiar face, though not one who often visited her privately. He was a studio liaison, someone she had worked with years earlier when her career first began to soar. Back then he had treated her kindly, with a sort of paternal warmth that made her feel safe in an industry where kindness was either currency or illusion. She remembered trusting him once. She remembered believing he genuinely cared. But people change, or show who they truly are. He closed the door behind him and walked closer, avoiding her eyes. Marilyn sensed immediately that something was wrong. His posture was stiff, his expression troubled, as if he had rehearsed what he was about to say and hated every second of it. "What is it?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "I need to talk to you about the studio." Her stomach tightened. Whenever someone began with the studio, the news was never good. He took a breath. "They're concerned." "About what?" she asked, though she already knew. She had been late twice that week. Not intentionally. Her insomnia had returned, the kind that left her staring at the ceiling until 4 a.m. and crawling out of bed with her soul wrapped in fog. But she knew how the studio interpreted such things: defiance, instability, unreliability. "About your state," he said carefully. "They're saying you're becoming difficult again, that you're not cooperating." Marilyn looked down at her hands. They were clasped too tightly. "I'm doing my best," she murmured. "I know," he said softly. "But they don't want excuses. They're saying if you can't keep up, they'll replace you." Replace her. The word pierced deeper than she let show. She had spent her entire life fighting to be seen, fighting to be taken seriously, fighting to have control over her own image. But in that moment, all she heard was a promise that she was disposable. She swallowed. "And what do you want me to do?" He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Just hold it together. Give them what they want. At least until this picture is done." Marilyn forced a nod. "I'm trying." He paused, then added, "There's something else." The dread settled deeper. "The studio wants to renegotiate your contract." Her head snapped up. "Renegotiate? Now. They're saying your unpredictability has created financial risks. They want clauses in place that give them more control, more oversight." Control. Oversight. Words she had spent years resisting. "And," he continued reluctantly, "they want to adjust your salary." Marilyn blinked. Adjust? But she already knew. In Hollywood, adjustments only ever went one way. "Cut," he admitted. Silence swallowed the room. Her breath left her. She had been humiliated by studios before, but this felt different. This felt deliberate, like a punishment, like a reminder that no matter how famous she was, the power never truly belonged to her. She sat back in her chair, staring again at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked fragile, almost ghost-like under the harsh dressing room lights. She barely recognized herself. The liaison lowered his voice. "Marilyn, they're doing this because they think you won't fight back." She looked at him, wounded. "And will you fight for me?" He held her gaze for a moment, just long enough to make her believe he might. Then he looked away. "I can only do so much." There it was. The truth. The abandonment she had grown so accustomed to. He was warning her, but he wasn't protecting her. The disappointment tasted bitter. He stood to leave, but before he reached the door he paused. "They're meeting tonight," he said. "If you want to salvage this, you need to give them a strong day on set. No delays. No tears. No hesitation. Just show them you can be the Marilyn they expect." The Marilyn they expect. She understood. Not the woman. Not the human being. The myth. The door closed behind him, leaving her alone with a truth she had spent years trying to outrun. In Hollywood, the brighter you shine, the easier they make it for you to burn. She sat in silence for several minutes. The weight in her chest grew heavier. She touched her own face gently, tracing the curve of her cheek, the corner of her eye, the trembling line of her lips. She wondered if the men making decisions behind closed doors had ever seen her as a person, if anyone on that set truly had. When she finally stood, her knees felt weak. She walked toward the door, took a breath, and stepped out onto the stage. But the hope she carried into the morning had already cracked. And by the time the producer confronted her in front of the crew, that crack had become a fault line. leaving her with only one option, to walk. To walk away from the lights, from the voices, from the people who treated her like a burden they were forced to manage. And what she did not know, what no one knew, was that someone else had been watching her all morning. Someone who saw the moment she broke. Someone with a secret connected to her contract, her reputation, and her future. Someone who had every reason to keep the real story buried for the next 40 years. And that someone approached her just minutes before she disappeared from the set. He approached her as she stood alone near the back of the soundstage, her hands resting on the edge of a prop table as if she needed something solid to hold on to. She didn't hear him at first. The noise of the crew moving equipment drowned out the soft footsteps behind her. But when he said her name, quiet, almost mournful, she stiffened. Marilyn. She turned slowly. It was the director, not the assistant, not a producer. Him, the man who had pushed her through take after take that morning. The man who had criticized her timing, her delivery, even the way she breathed between lines. The man the studio trusted more than they trusted her. The man whose opinion could make or break a performance, a contract, a career. He looked different now. No arrogance, no irritation, just a heaviness in his expression, like he was about to say something he shouldn't. I need to speak with you, he said. She swallowed. About what? He glanced toward the crew to make sure no one was watching, then stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that she could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the tension in his jaw. There's something you need to know, he said quietly. And I'm telling you this because I don't think they're being fair to you. Her heartbeat quickened, though she kept her voice steady. Who isn't being fair? He hesitated, long enough for dread to wrap itself around her ribs. The studio, he said finally. Your producers. The people handling your contract. Marilyn lowered her gaze. I know they want changes. They told me. Yes, he said. But they didn't tell you everything. She looked up sharply. His eyes flickered, not with malice, but with pity. She hated pity almost as much as humiliation. What didn't they tell me? She asked, her voice barely louder than a breath. He exhaled slowly. They've already drafted a replacement. A young actress. Fresh contract. They made a deal with her 3 days ago. The world tilted. Lightheaded. She steadied herself on the prop table. No, she whispered. That can't be right. They told me I just needed to cooperate. They said. They lied. The word hit her like a blow. He continued, voice low, urgent. They want you to finish this picture because your name still sells tickets. But after that, they're done. They're cutting your salary, cutting your options, cutting their ties. Marilyn stared at him, unable to speak. And the worst part, he said, lowering his voice further. The scenes they're reshooting today, they aren't reshooting them for quality. They're reshooting them to build a case that you're unstable, too emotional, too unreliable to keep on contract. She shook her head in disbelief. Why would they do that? He hesitated. And then, with brutal honesty. Because it's cheaper to blame you than admit they mishandled the production. Her chest tightened. Pain shot through her throat. She felt the tears threatening again, but she blinked hard, refusing to let them fall in front of him. They can't just replace me, she said, but even she heard the tremor in her voice. He looked at her with devastating sympathy. They already have. A long silence stretched between them. The studio noise faded. The footsteps, the clatter of props, the hum of lights. Everything dissolved into a muted blur. It felt like she was underwater, listening to the world from far away. Her mind raced. All her fears, all her doubts, all the whispers she had tried to silence for months. They were real. They weren't paranoia. They weren't insecurity. They were truth. She wasn't losing her place in Hollywood. She had already lost it. The director took a small step closer, lowering his voice even more. Marilyn, I shouldn't be telling you this. They'll fire me if they find out. But I don't want you blindsided. I've seen what this has done to you. You deserve honesty. Honesty. A currency so rare in her life that the word itself stung. She finally found her voice. Why are you telling me now? He hesitated, then said something she never expected to hear. Because they asked me to provoke you today. Her breath stopped. He went on, ashamed. They wanted footage. Evidence. Something to justify the narrative they're building. If you broke down on camera, if you stormed off, if you cried, it would give them exactly what they need. She stared at him, stunned. And when you walked off set earlier, he said quietly, they got what they wanted. The truth washed over her like cold water. They planned this. They orchestrated her humiliation. They waited for her to fall apart so they could claim she was unstable. Her walk off the set, the moment that haunted her for decades, wasn't a spontaneous collapse. It was a reaction to a trap. The director lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have refused. I should have stood up for you. But they control everything. And I didn't want to lose my job. There it was. The truth hidden for 40 years. The real reason she walked off that set in tears wasn't weakness. It wasn't erratic behavior. It wasn't diva theatrics. It was betrayal. Quiet. Calculated. Cruel. Marilyn felt her knees weaken. She reached for the wall to steady herself, breathing in short, trembling bursts. Her whole body felt numb, yet her heart pounded hard enough to hurt. The director gently touched her arm. Marilyn, please. You need to pull yourself together before they see you like this. She pulled her arm away. Because in that moment, she understood something with painful clarity. She wasn't breaking. She was being broken. Intentionally. By people who saw her as a commodity, not a human being. She lifted her chin, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and took a slow breath. There was no fight left to give. Not today. All she could do was walk away from the cruelty, if only for a moment, to save whatever pieces of herself remained. But as she stepped away from him, the director said one last thing, something so sharp and awful it would echo in her memory long after she left the set. There's another reason they're pushing you out, he murmured. Something personal. Something they're afraid might come to light. She stopped cold, her voice barely audible. What are they afraid of? He hesitated. Then, with resignation, they think you know too much. She didn't respond. She simply walked. And this time, she didn't look back.